Okay, this is Brent Raynes for Alternate Perceptions Online magazine, and today is Wednesday, the February the 26th, 2025, in case someone's doesn't realize that. And my special guest today is Mindy Tautfest of Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, right?
Yep.
And okay, well, I just read about your experiences and such that's in the Greater Reality Volume 4. And anybody that's really wants to get a real big overview of your lifelong experiences starting at age 5, it just evolved from there. And like so many people in the parapsychological community, UFO community, cryptid, whatever, a lot of times it starts with their own personal experiences, And so that's the case with you. You've been a Oklahoma State Director for the Mutual UFO Network, and you just told me a little while ago that you actually were Director of Training for investigators, and now you have resurrected Hayden Hewes's International UFO Bureau, which
I have. Yeah.
yeah, you're the CEO, the owner,
Yeah.
and the secretary of the board of directors, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been looking this up. Okay.
Yeah,
So,
great.
and
Yeah. And
of course,
it's amazing how all of that came about. It was, I was actually working a encounter that had happened over in southeastern Oklahoma. It was a schoolyard encounter, and it took place in a small town called Hartshorn. And growing up, living in Oklahoma my whole life, I had never heard of Hartshorn. And here I come across this small town that there's this really big happening back in the 70s with all these school kids. And then I start looking into the history of the town, and there are thousands of UFO reports coming out of this one small town. There's only 2,000 people that live there. So I was blown away at the amount that were logged over decades of events happening. And one name that kept coming up was Hayden Hewes and the International UFO Bureau. And I said, well, I've got to get a hold of Hayden Hewes. Well, unfortunately, this was in early 2022, I guess, 2021. And Hayden had unfortunately passed in 2017. So I ended up reaching out to his widow, and come to find out she lives about a mile away from me. And so we were able to connect, and I was mainly wanting to just kind of dig through the archives and see if he had anything in there that lined up with what I was finding out in Hartshorn. And in talking with Lonnie and looking through everything, she said, Hayden would want you to have these. I don't want them to go to waste, and sounds like you're going to be able to put them to good use. And I said, okay, I'd be honored. And so we loaded up all the bank boxes of all of the information. And I worked with a gentleman named Chris Jordan from Curious Realm and Curious Research that he came over to my house and stayed for 3 days, and he stayed in this little bitty office that we have, and just, pedal to the metal, digitizing every aspect of what we had, the videos, VCR tapes, audio tapes, lie detector results, newspaper clippings, and articles that Hayden had written, and as well as case files from different cases that he had worked and those within the Bureau had worked back in the 50s, 60s, 70s. So it was just kind of a treasure trove, and it led us into going, why don't we build off of this? Why don't we go ahead and relaunch this and imagine it the way that Hayden would imagine it being, with all the capabilities we have now. And I've been blown away from the support that we've had.
Well, I know that back when I was a teenager, I had a newsletter called Scientific Sauceritis Review. Sauceritis like a disease, because I saw when I was going through microfiche of early UFO cases, it was some, I think a psychologist who said it was like a mental disease with these people, and they're seeing things, and he said it's like a sauceritis. That's what I'm going to call my little newsletter. So anyway, uh, but one of my correspondents was a Tony Kimry out of Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, who was really big in the Men in Black. He was a teenager like me, but he was claiming that he was having MIB experiences. And I see where Hayden Hewes, who started out as a teenager in 1957, also
Uh-huh.
claimed an MIB experience. And I was told by Tommy Bland, who was once the deputy director of the International UFO Bureau, that Tony and Hayden's wife used to, they used to visit. I think he used to visit over there, and he would talk a lot. And I'm assuming they must have talked about the Men in Black. And also, Tony was big on Hawthorne. That was a place he was investigating back then. And I think even John Keel, who mentioned, reading about Tony, Tony Kimry in letters to me, also mentioned that area as being reportedly active. So I mean, it was all these years later. It's still
It's still having activity.
interesting.
Significant. Yeah. And last year there was a reporter that came out that I was working with, and he was really digging into some of the history of Hartshorn and the things that were going on out there. And I don't know what's come of that. He was going to be putting out a 10-part series surrounding everything that went down with the schoolyard encounter, and even the postmaster's wife, Alta Claire Morgan, that was collecting all of these UFO reports. And they had all of these people out there would come to her front yard, and they would have sky watches. And they had like two main types of craft that they would see. One they called the leader, which was a large disc shaped craft, and then there was the red blinkers that they saw as well. So we actually got to go out and visit Alta Claire Morgan's home, and her granddaughter actually lives there now. And we got to have a sky watch there, and it was amazing. It was just like they were doing all these years ago. And she was so welcoming and so wonderful. She had all the lawn chairs set up and a couple of adult beverages for us, and we just sat out there and had a time. And it was really just, it was wonderful to have that connection with the past. I'll
Yeah.
just one thing that you brought up, though, I kind of want to switch gears here because I don't want to lose sight of this, is that you started as a teenager, Hayden started as a teenager, Tommy, all these people back in the 50s and 60s, you guys were teenagers, and you were starting really the process of disclosure back then and looking into it because nobody else was talking about it publicly. But you guys were fearless. You came forward and you said, no, let's talk about this. Let's look at this. And you weren't worried about looking silly. And it really has paved the way for where we are today. I get tickled looking back through Hayden's archives and the letters he was writing to astronauts, he was writing to heads of state, he was writing to the president, he was writing, to all kinds of people, asking, right here is Werner von Braun,
Oh
he
wow.
was writing to J. Edgar Hoover, anybody that he could write to, he did. And even if they said, get lost, kid, he would catalog that and said, hey, I heard back from J. Edgar Hoover, which, they were actually, in pretty good correspondence. So it's amazing to look back what you guys were doing as teenagers.
And it's
And
still going on in the next my next issue. In my column Reality Check, and I'm going to be having a section of this. I think he's a senior now in high school up in Alaska, who has been, writing to different people, wanting to find out information on UFOs, and he wanted to help any way he could. And he contacted Mark Rudinger, who's over the Center for UFO, Dr. Hynek's Center for UFO Studies, and they gave him an assignment to work on. So, and I contacted Mark and got a statement from him, and and he's already asked me if, hey, is there anything I can help you with, and so I sent him
Yeah.
some, of things that I have done. Told him about my start as a teenager. So it just
Yep.
that kind of made me think about how many of us in the field started very, very young.
Well,
Um,
and it's so important that the veterans are mentoring the new people coming in and sharing and passing along that knowledge so it does not get lost. That's part of why, it was such a big and important thing for us to digitize all of Hayden's archive so that it didn't get lost to time. And now we're making it searchable so that the public can have access to all of this information. And you think of how many basements are filled with these kind of files that are getting lost to time.
yeah, you'll find Shirley Fickett in there somewhere. My friend from Portland, Maine, years ago, who used to be a member of the International UFO Bureau. She was into the UFOs and the paranormal, the whole kit. She was an experiencer herself. So, there's got to be some letters in those files you get from her.
I'll let you know.
But
Yeah, he had some amazing things in there. And like I said, the fact that he was a teenager when he started this just blows my mind, that he had that forethought to just start writing to people and just
well,
starting to investigate whatever came in.
I know that I would go through books and magazines, and I would call the operator and see, do you have a phone number or an address for so and so that I'd read in a magazine or book, And
Uh-huh.
my dad didn't like me calling, from the house, so I'd have to save up my coins and go to a phone booth and call somebody and at least talk with them for 3 or 4 minutes. The
Oh my goodness.
operator would say, "Okay, you're out of time. You need to deposit some more coins, or this call is
Yep.
going to be ended." But yeah, of course, I could, me and a friend, we were calling operators, and you could get a real live operator. You key in the local area code and, just say,
They
I'm
had the
looking.
switchboard they'd plug in.
And, now, of course, we got internet, and there's a whole different kind of operation. But it's, I would like to have had it back in the day, and I probably would be more familiar with a lot of this technology that I am today, because sometimes I can mess it up pretty good.
Can't we all? But that's why it's so important to have all these different ages involved, because that's what we're doing with the Bureau now is, I just signed on a young lady that's like 30 years old, and she's doing our social media for us, which I have not had time to do because every day I'm on the phone continuously and answering emails. Everybody wants to get behind the Bureau and what we're doing. So, having her expertise to handle the social media side of things and all the algorithms, let her do that.
Mhm.
Um, with what we're trying to do at the Bureau now is we're right now in the background, we're building our database out. Uh, Already have the wireframe and everything, and now we're working on building it and integrating the report mechanisms so that we can intake any new reports, and we're going to be able to query information to compare to those reports. So any of the flight radar data, any of the weather data, any of the astronomical, rocket launchers from SpaceX, and any satellites, we can compare that to the information that's coming in and see if anything lines up. And computers can do that automatically. So it's revolutionizing the way that we do UFO investigations. We can come to, a pretty solid conclusion up front with the computer analysis, but then take a deeper look with a human to verify and make sure that things are correct. And then the ones that remain unknown, we can really dig into that, pull out as much information as possible, and then be able to query that through the power of AI to get deep understandings about different patterns that are emerging or different trends that are popping up, or how things have even changed from throughout time. one of the special projects that we're doing is working with the indigenous community, and that's being headed by Michelle Miners, who has been out in the Uinta Basin her whole life, and the Navajo Rangers with John Dover and Stanley Milford. They're going to be working directly with any tribal reports that come in or anything that's on tribal lands, and to make sure that they're approached appropriately and cataloged appropriately. Then we'll be able to kind of query what traditional knowledge has been telling us, if anything's changed from what the traditional knowledge was and what it's presenting as now with the phenomena, and even comparing that against things in our archives, what was going on in the 50s and 60s compared to what's happening now. So we're going to be getting a large swath of information that we can pull data from and start seeing how things have changed, how things have stayed the same, how do things line up. Is there one specific type of entity that's encountered in proximity to any type of craft? So can we start drawing conclusions on that scale? And then on the other side of things is we're working with the first responders to inform them based on the information that we're able to gather. So there's multiple moving parts within what we're doing and setting up within the Bureau, but it's moving fast. I mean, I've got the website up about 3 weeks ago, and this has maybe been 2 months in the making, and we're making huge strides already. So I'm incredibly excited.
Wow, that's great. Yeah, the Native American aspect is something that's really quite fascinating. In fact, my wife Joan, who's part Cherokee, and I are going to join Dr. Greg and Laura Little again on a Indian Mound tour up in Ohio in July. We've done some with them before, and what we do is we go ahead and help to lead meditations. Greg's sort of more the historian on the different sites and so on. But the certain sites we'll actually gather with a group that we bring with us on a bus, and we'll kind of we have the Peruvian whistling vessels, we have a drum, and we have a rattle, and just create the atmosphere. And sometimes it's some really interesting things that people experience. And this is a group that actually is from the Association for Research and Enlightenment, which is the Edgar Casey Foundation out of Virginia Beach, Virginia. Which they've had two UFO conferences that I've gotten to attend, and got to meet Jacques Vallée there, which was a real thrill because I've read his books and everything and articles for years, and then I finally would get to meet him, and interview him. And that's one of the best things about these conferences is getting to network with people you wouldn't ordinarily meet, and learn things from them. The Native American, when I was traveling around back in the 70s, mid 70s, I was meeting a contactee up in near Akron, Ohio, who was part Native American, and she told me about this medicine man down in Pennsylvania, way down in southeastern Pennsylvania, and he was Sequanahawk. And I went to pay him a visit, and the second time I took Joan with me, he had, and we'd write back and forth. He had all these stories about beings, and one was a group, the Yudushka, which was part of the spirits of his ancestors. And he'd say, "You say Yudushka, you're very very guttural." And he says they're so tall that when they come in the door, they have to bend down. And his wife had a drawing of this craft that landed behind their house back in 1961. They called it the fire canoe, but I call it a spaceship. Anyway, it was, he just had all of these very interesting stories. And then there's been others over the years. Usually Bear Lake, Bobby Lake, white name, but he was of mixed native races. He was a college professor. He did Indian studies, And then one day he'd been having these repeated dreams about these four eagles flying in a circle. It was a humming sound, and then they would turn into flying saucers. And he had this several times, so he asked a medicine man to try to, smudge him and see, to try to get an understanding of what these dreams meant.
Yeah.
And the medicine man said, "You are being contacted by the space brothers or the space people." And he says, "I was very rude at the time." He says, "I said, don't give me that nonsense,
Oh my goodness.
But then one night I think maybe it was in the morning. It was around his birthday, and there was the dream, the humming sound. He woke up from the dream, and there was still a humming sound in the house. So he walked out of the bedroom and into the living room. In front of this big picture window was hovering a classic flying saucer with a dome on top. And suddenly there was a bright flash, and he was on board it. And it was piloted. First, it was the beings were covered in this haze. There were four of them, and then the haze lifted, and it was being piloted by Native Americans.
Oh my gosh.
And so that's the way his story began, and then he shared other stories about, the power of what they were, doing. His father lived on a reservation there in California, and they were seeing UFOs there, and strange things were happening, and he very much followed, the medicine path, and would, you know, he'd had, I think, 4 near-death experiences as a young man. So, I mean, he had it all. He'd seen
Yeah.
Bigfoot and everything else. And he wrote a book called Native Healer, and a couple of other books. One was on animal symbolism, which he had told me about. He sent me a copy, autographed it, and we were going to get together and do another interview. And lo and behold, though, time went on, I thought, gee, I need to get back with him, and come and find out when I checked, after having an experience that kind of led me to think maybe something's happened, because we saw an eagle one day on the side of the road in a field, just clawing at the dirt. And then we hadn't seen an eagle in years. And then this friend who's an experiencer who I've had like some synchronicities with up in Nashville, the very same day, writes about seeing a circle of eagles going in a circle right over her house. Never seen that before. Lived here like 10 years. And
Yep. You got to love the synchronicities.
I thought, oh. So I checked online, and I saw there was a tribute to him. He had passed. And I thought, yeah,
Wow.
that's what I get for, dragging my feet.
Yeah. Sounds like he was almost sending you signs. It's really interesting, the connection of birds with the UFO experiencers. I actually, last week I did an interview with Mike Clellan, which he zeroes in on the owls.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I came across, and I think I wrote about it in that chapter for Ray, was whenever I was working with an experiencer here in Oklahoma, and he had reported to me that he had some kind of connection with cranes. And I thought, okay, well, that's weird. I've heard of owls or eagles even, but cranes, okay. And he told me, he could summon UFOs. So I went out with him, and we went up on this hill, and there were other investigators there, which were all experiencers as well. And we go up there, and we had a few hours. We saw a couple of lights in the sky, nothing spectacular. But as we were leaving, he actually, excuse me, he actually points up in the air and he goes, "Look at that pterodactyl." It was a sandhill crane, but it was only about 15 feet above our heads, and it swooped down. It just kind of came out of nowhere, and it flew up 60 to 80 feet away, and it poofed out of existence just right in front of us. And now the gentleman I was there with, that was showing me these capabilities, he wasn't aware that this was maybe like my third or fourth case that I investigated. So I was a brand new, you know, investigator, and I was not expecting anything of that level of spectacular, but it happened. And all of us stood there, and your brain's trying to catch up with it. You're thinking, okay, is it going to pop back in, or did it turn sideways? Am I just not seeing it right? Or, and you're trying to make sense of something just vanishing in front of you. But he had, lo and behold, told me before that he had connection with cranes, and here this crane just poofs into existence, swoops over us, and then flies up and poofs back out, you know, in open sky. So
And
I
that was on,
think
because I read that in the article you wrote in Greater Reality, and it was on Native American land at one time, the hill that you were standing on.
yeah, it was an Osage Nation. Yeah.
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 And it makes you wonder, did they have any mythologies or anything about the sacredness of the sandhill
Of the
crane?
crane.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was that hill was all covered in natural sage. And so the gentleman I was with told me, you know, gather up some of that sage and take that with you, you know, and, you know, purify after, you know, having that kind of encounter. So I did. I was able to bring some home with me, and it was just kind of a neat thing to be able to follow up on that level.
I remember reading a story. This was someone who studied different cultures, I think, ethnographer or something, and it was in a book by David. Um, oh well, anyway.
I get the same thing.
I can put my hands on it, but right at the moment. But anyway, in the story, this guy is among this group of people, you know, that's not part of his culture, and he sees this bird, and it vanishes right before his eyes. And he goes to talk to the locals, and they say, "Oh, yeah, that's a bird that's familiar with us. It's spirit." Kind of a trickster, I guess. Likes to do that to people. You know.
Wow.
So maybe you had a trickster on your hands there.
Maybe it was spectacular, whatever it was, and it's something I'll never forget. But I want to go back. Also, you had mentioned about the gentleman being a near-death experiencer. That was your friend, and that is something I ended up building off of that. That chapter I wrote for Ray Hernandez and turned it into a whole book. And most of it focuses on my near-death experience whenever I had a brain aneurysm in 2016,
Mm-hmm.
and what came after that, what came through that. But my research following that, I ended up finding the Omega Project by Dr. Kenneth Ring, and all of the things that he was finding with the connections between near-death experiencers and UFO experiencers. But one of the things that I thought was really interesting was Kathleen Martin had done a similar study and came to the realization that 55% of abductees are near-death experiencers. And you go to the general population, that's about 5% of people have had near-death experiences, which is still millions of people. But why is it so much higher within the experiencer, UFO experiencer community? You know, to the point of 50% more. You know, I don't think that's not how that works.
Well, I know that Dr. Edgar
55%,
Mitchell.
but within the researcher side, I don't know if you've come across this, but most of the researchers that have gone on to do deep research into UFOs are near-death experiencers. And I would say about 90% of my friends within the UFO research community have had a near-death experience. So there's that major connection there, that something about the NDE opens up contact, or even vice versa. Contact can lead to people being able to pull information whenever they have a health crisis. So there's a huge connection there.
Yeah, and
Are you getting information about your dog?
no, about whether we should get a chicken for tonight.
Oh no.
You caught that one. Okay. Yeah, I know that Ray Hernandez of the, Edgar Mitchell Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial and Extraordinary Experiences was very much into that. I recall his father had an NDE, and something I'd heard from another case that was similar is that when he was, it was a changing experience for him. I don't think he was really a religious person at all, but he said his father said that it was like years, hours turned into years over there, in the experience. I heard that from another person here in Tennessee. And I know a lady up in, she's passed on now, but up in Pennsylvania, she was really a member of Stan Gordon's group, who really studied a lot of UFO Bigfoot, still is involved in all that, really, all these years later, many years. But anyway, she had an NDE, and she was like in this other world, and she was told that that year or the following year, she was going to find her mission in life. And she could not figure out what it was, other than the fact that she was listening to a radio show, and it was on UFOs, and she had seen some UFOs, and I also met her. She also, I don't know if it was the same year, but she had also encountered Bigfoot one time. So I mean, and I was just in touch with a gentleman out in Arizona who originally was from Pennsylvania as a young boy. He said that was his first experience, was with Joan Jeffers and another guy, last name Johnson, who I'd met. They had helped him. They were at his house where apparently Bigfoot had been seen, and on this particular occasion, he was present when two Bigfoots appeared, and I think they shined lights at him, and yeah, they did. And then the Bigfoots were running away, and as they were running away, they turned translucent and then disappeared. They were
Mm-hmm.
they were changing from physical to, I can see through them.
Non-physical, yeah.
And this Mr. Johnson said he said he knelt down and he told me, "You will never forget this night. This is something that is going to, change." I mean, he's like only 13, I think, at the time. He says,
Wow.
and now he's out in Sedona, Arizona, going to the Bradshaw Ranch for over 10 years now, studying it and having.
That's awesome.
So, yeah, I've been getting some of his story, put in the magazine, and
Great. That's one thing that I really respected going through Hayden's files, was he didn't rule out anything. He just let the information come as it came in. And so I know some are very much on the side of Bigfoot has nothing to do with UFOs, or, who cares about consciousness? We only care about, technology. But you have to have that very wide view to be able to let the evidence speak for itself, and to be able to go through that data and be able to understand, let it speak for itself, let it come out and show exactly, are these things related or not? I think that once we understand that there is a consciousness aspect to the phenomena, to the technology, to operating it, we can't have one without the other. And so I know there's different factions. Some people are only consciousness, some people are only technology. And one of the things I'm trying to do is maintain that same spirit that Hayden put into the Bureau when he founded it, was let's take it all in. Let's really look at it, and let's listen to the people that had these experiences. Let them tell us what happened. And then if we start seeing patterns emerge, then that tells us that maybe there is a connection there, or maybe there isn't.
Yeah, a
Let
good
the
example.
speak for itself.
Yeah, a good case. Jacques Vallée's confrontations. He describes meeting this witness in California. After reading the report by these investigators, then went to interview the person himself. And during the visit, um, this person described to Valley how this UFO rose up from the ground and then took off down the valley, passed directly through these trees like it was a ghost, like the trees weren't even physically there.
Wow.
And Valley said, "Well, that's interesting. That wasn't mentioned in their report that it actually passed directly through the trees." And he said, "Well, that's because the investigators were explaining their position on things to want to tell me how they felt, and I realized that if I told them that, they weren't going to believe me. So I left that
Wow.
piece. But and then told about seeing a being by the bed one time, and Valley said, "Well, that wasn't in their report either." Right? Yeah, they wouldn't have bought that either.
Yep.
Um,
Well,
I
yeah,
have,
you got a lot of bias that comes in from all sides, and we have to maintain that open mind. We have to take personal bias out of it, and we have to allow the experiencers to speak for themselves. Because you think a detail's not important, or you don't believe that that meshes with your worldview or your idea of the phenomena, you're doing a huge disservice. And I haven't found that in Hayden's files.
mhm,
he he recorded pretty much everything. And even on the website, one of the things that I posted, and I think it's important to address, is the lie detector results from the Heaven's Gate investigation, because they came in and visited with Hayden and Brad Steiger very often. Multiple times they came in and spoke with them. And so they gave them a lie detector. And it showed that they did believe what they were saying. Now, does that make it true? No. It could be. I don't think so. But but we know for a fact that what Applewhite and Nettles were saying, they believed themselves. So I thought it was real interesting the way that he handled that case. And he had to do it very delicately, obviously, after the mass suicide and everything. And there's still tapes and stuff that I have from within his collection that I don't think have ever been released. But he navigated that very well and very professionally.
yeah.
And there's something to say for that.
Wasn't there? If I remember right, I read this somewhere. um, I think he met them, or maybe it was Brad Steiger met them, but I think it was Hayden Hewes. He was somewhere and met them, and that couple, and then it was like they just disappeared.
Yeah.
In like, where did they go? you know, and
Yeah.
he didn't think they had time to get out of sight. They were just there in the room and then suddenly gone.
Yeah, there
Um,
were several strange instances that he recorded. There was one where they had given him Applewhite had given him a thought code sequence and said, if you want to contact me, send out this thought code sequence telepathically, and I'll be in contact. And so Hayden waited like 9, 10 months or so before he actually put this to the test. And he did it. And he said that next morning he got a phone call. Hey, we received your communication. And so there were things that he did encounter with them that
mhm.
seemed otherworldly and seemed very, bizarre. And he just recorded it. I think what you're referring to is the article that I had posted on my site, and I can't remember. I can't remember who wrote it. It's posted on there and credited to him, the gentleman that did. But he talks about the instance where they seem to disappear, and the thought code sequence instance, and some of the other strange things. But he titled it "Why Hayden Hewes Was Almost Convinced," because he saw some of these strange things, but there was still some reserve within him that told him this isn't quite right.
Yeah,
um, so that's something we have to be aware of as investigators. Some of these beliefs that get really far out there, and maintaining that level of respect, and being able to approach it as an investigator to record that information without showing support or encouraging any kind of activity such as what ended up transpiring with Heaven's Gate.
Yeah. And there's, as Keel and others noted, there's kind of like a trickster element in some of it. You have to really be discerning. Some people are kicking around the idea that it's almost a co-creational process. Sometimes it's our thoughts projected in there, and it's not really. It appears to be reality, but it's imitating our reality in some ways, and some of our belief systems may conform to our expectations or something.
Right. That they're almost accessing data within our minds and using that as a screen projection.
Yeah, and then there's like an old timer in the field of the paranormal. Harold Sherman wrote this book, Know Your Own Mind. I've been looking for this article. I was telling someone about it, where he was writing a novel, and it was and in the novel there was this woman who was very manipulative, and you had to really watch out for and all this. And the psychic lady started writing to him, Harold, you must be very careful. And she described this woman perfectly, and he wrote back and says, you're 100% right. You had a direct hit, except the woman is a part of a fictional story I'm writing.
Oh my goodness.
Not real. So, how sometimes maybe, topoids or some sort of psychic projection that it comes from maybe our own mind. So maybe sometimes a trickster is a character is us in the mirror when we look in the bathroom mirror in the morning or something.
Yeah. Well, and even the way that the phenomena sometimes presents itself is going to be I say it has the ridiculous factor. And it almost seems like the more bizarre it is, the more chance that this is a true recounting of something that happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I've come across that in my own life. Things that I thought were completely, yeah, maybe there's not much to it, but I'll be polite and record things as I'm supposed to as an investigator. And then sure as heck it happens to me. And the things that present itself is the things that I think is the most ridiculous presentation. And I've heard that from other experiencers where their encounters present as the most far-fetched thing. And of course, no one's going to believe it, because you don't even believe it going into it. And, it's strange how it does that to almost cloak itself, and its true intentions, that it puts forth that ridiculous front that it knows most of humanity's not going to buy into.
Yeah, I know it's for most people, it's an automatic. You mentioned UFOs, it's a knee-jerk reaction. Well, they might accept maybe certain parts of it, but when you start talking about the contact experience or landing and beings and all this, mental contact, and they walk through walls. Um, John Keel wrote back in his book in 1970, Strange Creatures in Time and Space, aliens, ghosts, what's the difference? They all walk through walls and everything else. It's the frame of reference that throws us, and people see a ball of light in the house, it's a spirit. If it's over the house, it's a ET, right? I mean,
yeah,
we don't know. It's something that's unidentified. But when it gets into the, I think Jenny Randall's over in England, she called it the Oz factor or Oz effect. And you see something at a distance, it appears to be quite physical and whatnot. And then it comes really close. And then it's like you entered the land of Oz. All of a sudden, there's a mental contact, a being appears, and because I know that in your own life experience, you've had the shadowy hat man who often shows up in these cases, and poltergeist effects.
yeah,
Often a UFO close encounter is followed by, poltergeist manifestations. Whether that's the person's traumatic reaction, like sometimes a trauma may activate poltergeist, or someone going through some sort of emotional mental disturbance or what, but still is that factor. Um, And I know I saw a graph one time that was done that showed UFO activity and poltergeist activity side by side. And a lot of times when it went up with UFOs, it went up with poltergeists, you know.
Yeah.
Uh, so,
Yeah, a lot of it comes down to the person's perception of how they perceive. Was this a UFO? Was this more spiritual? It's really comes down to their interpretation of what they encountered. So that's why, again, one person's UFO is someone else's, angel flying in the sky, or it's always through the lens of our human assessment of the situation. And so we've really got to look at what information is there at its core. And that's what we're trying to do is all of these different presentations. Uh, who's to say until we take that deep dive and really start seeing what lines out, what patterns start coming and emerging. I think it's going to end up confirming what a lot of you old timers had been finding all along, and the things that you guys have been putting out there for decades now. That it's going to end up confirming what we already kind of knew.
yeah, I know I met a couple ladies who were friends up in Pennsylvania, and they shared with me their UFO encounter and then the after effects that they had. You know, seeing, well, actually there were two UFOs. One was watching one was watching the other. Afterwards, they started having like poltergeist activity, strange dreams. But the difference is one had this dream where it was like Jesus appeared to her, and it was, she felt very comforted by the experience. The other one thought they were devils or something, and it was very negative, And yet they
Yeah.
both had the same experience, but the reactions, the aftermath was how they accepted it, dealt with it was quite different. It was interesting to talk with him, and sitting in on the conversation was Barry Downing, who wrote the UFO Flying Saucers in the Bible, which I thought was very very interesting. And there was a deputy sheriff that I had met before, who was at this conference that I was at, and in Scranton, Pennsylvania. And I always kind of wondered. I talked to the sheriff and local lawyer, that dealt with the deputy. He'd been let go because in some ways he was very good, but sometimes his imagination got the best of him, and they had to let him go. And but there was a guy who did radio shows who was the MC that day, and he told me I gave this guy uh, 2 weeks of free publicity with some event he was doing, and during that time, my house erupted with poltergeist activity. My wife and my small child were very upset by what was going on. As soon as the radio special ended, the activity ended. It was only at the time it started to the time it ended. It says, "What do you think of that?" I said, no idea. It just happens. But
Yeah. Yeah.
anyway, um, but a lot of people. I know when I was traveling around the country, I had this psychiatrist friend, Dr. Berthold Schwartz, lived in Montclair, New Jersey, and um, he would kind of guide me to different places, to interview people that he had met, because he was kind of influenced. John Keel had, he was studying just parapsychology, and John Keel saw where he had written an article in a medical journal dealing with 4 different cases of people that his patients who had UFO experiences. And Dr. Schwartz said that was going to be my swan song. I was going to be done with it, but then got a letter from John Keel because Paul Harvey got a hold of the story and gave it big publicity. So that's how John Keel got onto Dr. Schwartz and contacted him. So um, I got introduced to Dr. Schwartz back in around 1973, and we corresponded extensively. We used to write articles for our magazine, and he also um, would recommend people that I should interview. Even the amazing Kritzkin I interviewed, and a whole host of different interesting characters, that otherwise I never would have got an opportunity to talk to. And he really felt that a lot of the contact experiences had a lot in common with people who you called mediums or channelers. There was some sort of connection with their abilities and what they were experiencing. Um, and he said a lot of these things are in the Bible, these phenomena, but there's different spins on that people place on different things. But he was all the time trying to get people to work with him to do experiments and so on. But anyway,
Well, that's like the contact modalities, basically. And one of the things with what Dr. Ring had found during the Omega Project was that there is actually an encounter-prone personality that's underlying. And that really rang true for me whenever I was reading through it, because whenever I had my near-death experience, and then I went on to become a UFO investigator, talking to UFO abductees, that's whenever I started making that connection, like, these people sound like me, but why? And if there is a connection here, someone else has seen it, and it was Dr. Ring that did. But that encounter prone personality, a lot of times it is linked to a trauma of some type that has taught experiencers how to dissociate to the point of excluding their environment, where they're completely immersed, their mind is completely immersed in another realm. And he actually went so far as to differentiate between people that were fantasy prone and people that were encounter prone. And the two groups were very different. The encounter prone people tended to not be fantasy prone. They were actually learning to send their consciousness into contact with other things. So I think that opens a person up to so many different types of phenomena. So yeah, you'll have like the hitchhiker effect after a UFO encounter, or after I had a near-death experience, it spiked in orbs and stuff flying around my home. And these are things that my other family members would see. So it wasn't anything generating from my mind, unless it was a projection, a physical projection. Um, there's so much still for us to understand and to learn from
yeah,
all of these different connections. And that's why I'm so excited about what we're doing with the Bureau, and really taking it in this new direction with the new technologies and putting it to work for us, so that we really can start looking at this evidence in a whole different way, and take out some of that bias and see what the data really tells us.
yeah, because there's just too many people who have very credible backgrounds and are seeing and reporting these things. It's not, and it's the paranormal investigator visits a witness and they say, "Oh, I saw a flying saucer land too." Well, I'm here just about the ghosts, or the Bigfoot guy. I'm just here about.
Right.
Okay, I'm not going to report the one where you said the Bigfoot stepped out of the UFO. We'll leave that alone. I just wanted the
Yeah,
details.
we'll leave that out.
Yeah, and it's a lot of stuff's been censored, not by the government, by us.
Absolutely. Wow, that's a statement right there.
I mean,
Let's put
I
that on a
mean,
t-shirt.
I mean, like Valley coming, I think in 1963, Northwestern University in Chicago, and he meets Dr. Hynek and they become friends, and he's telling Dr. Hynek, who's been the astronomer for the help in the Air Force, and a lot of it was for debunking, but they always thought landings and burnt places in the ground was just teenage kids, with gasoline, and just they ignored
Yeah.
the cases, they ignored the contacts,
And cattle mutilations are the Satanists, right?
right, and which is something Tommy Bland was very deep into. But Valley tells them about several hundred cases in France in 1954 that seemed very credible, landings and beings, and they were very strange, high strange as Hynek called it. But this opened doors for Hynek. He was not really. He really hadn't prepared or studied whatever was behind the Sacro, New Mexico officer Zamora's sighting of the egg-shaped craft, and
Yeah.
whatever it was, whether it was some people say it was some college students hoaxing him, or it was this or that. But it was the one case that in 1964 that Hynek really said, well, I guess maybe Valley was right. There, there is something we should look at in these type of cases, and that was one that was taken seriously by many. But anyway, um, so um, are you going to be maybe speaking at conferences, or is the IUFOB going to have any public events like that, or thought about it?
We're working towards it. Like I said, it's been 2 months since we resurrected it as a 501c3, and it has been nonstop. I mean, literally, I have my phone silenced here, and I probably have about 20 notifications just in this hour. It has been incredible. The energy surrounding it and all the people coming and wanting to support everything we're doing. I've been really just, I was not expecting that level of support that we are already being shown. So it's going to take us a while. Right now, here very soon we'll be able to start intaking new case reports. And once the database is ready, we'll be able to start putting out analysis, different levels of analysis, and looking at the phenomena in a whole new way. So that's coming. And once we're able to do that, then we'll be looking at holding conferences, which Hayden used to have them here in Oklahoma City, and they had thousands of people. He has pictures, just thousands of people
Oh,
that would
I didn't know
gather.
that.
So, I would not be doing him justice if I didn't, start looking to have conference here in his honor as well. So I'm trying to keep it as true to his initial spirit that he put into the Bureau, and just, bring in that modern technology spin to it to really take it to that next level.
So how long had the organization been at a standstill until you went in there and about?
I really don't, I'm not quite sure. I don't know. That's one thing that I meant to ask his widow. I'm not quite sure when he shut it down. The paperwork tends to run out in the 80s or so. So I know that eventually he shifted over and ran a modeling agency, and he had some encounters and stuff that kind of pushed him away from wanting to do investigation. So, um,
I know that Tommy Bland had told me that there had been a house fire that burned up some of his records, and he was
it
getting out
did.
at that point. That was right after one of the members had passed away, and they met at the funeral. And so, this is what Tommy Bland had told me, I guess a couple months ago, as I was trying to reach out to him again. I guess he's 77 or 78 now,
Um,
having health problems. But last time I spoke with him, I was trying to get him to talk with you. And
yeah, getting to reach out. I'll tell you, in those archives that I do have, Tommy was a powerhouse. I mean, he was one
yes,
of the top researchers here with Hayden, and yeah, if he ever feels up to it, give me a call. I would love to speak with him and just make sure that I'm keeping things on the same spirit as what he encountered back whenever it was operational in the 50s, 60s, 70s.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I know I've reached out to him, and because I had a letter from Tommy Bland back about a strange incident back around 1971, and we keep noticing our names, but it turns out that apparently the Tommy Bland that wrote to me was a cousin of his who also had the same first name.
Oh
So
my
anyway,
goodness. How funny. Are you sure he's not telling you a story?
well,
No,
he's
that
told me
wasn't
some,
me. That was my cousin by the same name. That
yeah,
seems suspicious.
yeah, 'cause I was following up on a story about a car that this cousin had seen, that the car just vanished while they were near it. So anyway,
Oh,
you know, and the Tommy I was talking to, well, Yeah, he was kind of a trickster sometimes. I don't know. He says, you know, whether that was real or not. But he said, I don't remember ever hearing that story. But
Oh
I,
my goodness.
but I did, you know, like I don't know if I mentioned, but the April 2023, I interviewed Tommy Bland. It's in my alternate perceptions on cattle mutilations, and then May 2003, UFOs and possible government secrets, also in alternate perceptions at AP Magazine. Info.
Awesome.
So anyway,
Yeah.
but his health took a bad turn. After that, we were going to do a third interview on Bigfoot, and that's not happened, and I don't know if it's going to. But I did
Yeah.
ask him about a year later because I wanted to write one on Bigfoot sightings, and I asked him to tell me that story, which he did. But he's still got more stories to tell if, well, you know, he gets the
Yeah.
feeling that.
Well, thank you for getting that down and recording all that so all of his knowledge doesn't get lost to time.
Well,
I know I'll be going back and looking at what all you have because I want to see different things.
he was definitely wanting to get the word out and to not let it, you know, uh, you know, because he says, you know, he wrote a lot of articles and like Saga's UFO report and such, and he's got pictures. He sent me pictures like him with Dr. Alio Sprinkle and
Oh yeah.
Dr. J. Allen Hynek. He visited Bigelow in Las Vegas. I mean, he was all over the place, you know,
Yeah.
active, and he would like to be that way again, but his health is not, you know. In fact, with these conferences in Washington D.C. Recently, you know, the disclosure things, he says, I wish I could be there. You know, there was a time I could have gotten in the car and just took off. But anyway,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
I guess
Well, we owe him a debt of gratitude, I'll tell you. All of the guys that were and ladies that were involved in all the investigations, uh, they've left us so much information that we can build on. And you know, that's one of the important things with getting these collections digitized.
mhm.
If anyone out there has them, you know, don't take the chance that there's going to be another fire. You know, we have the capability now to within a few days to do several banker boxes of scanning, you know, and get these things on a digital format where hopefully they won't ever get lost to time again. So I know that David Marler is out and you know collecting a lot of these collections and getting them together and working towards getting everything digitized as well. So I think that there's going to be a explosion of information, you know, in the coming years where these archives investigators like me are going to start digging into them and going, "Oh my gosh, look what's here!" You know,
Yeah,
and
well,
it's
you
like
got
a real discovery of it.
yeah, you got Mylar, and you got Rice University, and you got Stephen Miles Lewis, also in Texas, with his Anomaly Archives, and you got a large organization over in Sweden that's gathering information, and a lot of it
Yes.
from here in the United States has gone over there. Um, and I think Grant Cameron up in Canada has collected Stan Friedman's stuff. Well,
Yeah.
anyway, I guess it's I kept you on. I told you
Yeah.
about an hour, and it's
Yeah. It's gone quick, hasn't it?
yes, it has. We'll have to do this again sometime if you're willing.
Absolutely. Yeah. I enjoyed it, Brent. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay. Well, thank you. It's been quite interesting, and I'm glad to see that the UFOB is going to be resurrected and like the phoenix rising from the ashes there. Um,
Yeah.
so anyway, thank you very much, Mindy. I sincerely appreciate it, and best of luck with you know your efforts here, and you know on to the next.
All right. Thank you so much, Brent.
All right, thank you, Mindy.